you have to give me $5 after the reading. I'll be standing by the door, and you give me the $5 in small bills after the reading. I'm glad you figured out that that was a joke. We have two wonderful poets reading tonight. They're going to read in this order. Ginger Murchison is going to read first. And by the way, when both poets are finished, they're going to read for 25 minutes each. When they're finished, hang on for just 35 seconds longer and let me thank some other people. Ginger Murchison helped build this house. She was the first associate director of poetry at Tech when we started in 2002. For the first year when we were organizing it, I wasn't here yet. I was still teaching in New York, and she was held responsible for planning and setting up the entire first year. Our first reading was at the First Center, 1,200 people, 1,200 seats. She was more or less ordered, not by me, but by people who are no longer here, but ordered to fill the First Center, to sort of prove that poetry could fly at Georgia Tech. She did that, 1,200 people. We have the seating chart in our office framed, and a name of every single, on every single seat. She didn't have an office here at Tech. She didn't have a phone here at Tech, and she frankly had very little help. Ken Knespel was probably her greatest help here then. 5 years she served as associate director. She's also been a visiting McEver professor. When she finished working here, she went and got her MFA degree in poetry at Warren Wilson College, and just recently published her first full-length book of poems called A Scrap of Linen, a Bone, which is published by Press 53, which is edited by Tom Lombardo right here in Atlanta. 3 of her poems from this book were read by Garrison Keillor on his NPR radio program just this past fall. That's very, very unusual. It was a very well-greeted book. She's the editor of the Cortland Review, which was one of the earliest and now one of the very best online magazines, probably the best that exists. She's a trustee of the Poets Frost Place up in New Hampshire. Is it New Hampshire or Vermont? One of those places where it snows a lot. I have to admit, I have this weird character flaw. That I believe that credit should go where credit is due. And without Ginger Murchison and her work here in the first 5 years of poetry at Tech, well, it wouldn't have happened. We wouldn't be here now. It would not have happened. So I owe her personally a great debt, and Georgia Tech does too. I think that's all I really need to say, except the poems in this book, A Scrap of Linen. And you should all be able to get free books, by the way, out there. We have, by both poets, we have over 100 free books to take home, and we have copies of Terminus magazine, which is sponsored by Poetry at Tech and edited by Travis and Katie. So everybody should leave here with a book today, a free book of poetry or a literary magazine. But the poems in A Scrap of Linen, a Bone, are made poems. They don't just happen. Poems don't just come down your arm. Sometimes people think that. But poems are engineered. They're made things. They're worked on. They're developed. They're discovered. There's all sorts of things inside of them that the regular reader is not necessarily supposed to see or notice. Her craft is impeccable. Her ear is splendidly tuned. She's a deeply lyrical poet whose poems do what I most want poems to do, to me. I want to be moved. That's the first thing. That's the most important thing to me. I want to be moved by what's human and alive about them. So when she gets up here first, I'm going to introduce Mark now too, to save time for me walking up and down and more time for poetry. But listen to Ginger's poems and you will be changed. Mark Doty is an internationally known poet. I've known him for 40 years, at least 40 years. I was, in fact, his MFA thesis advisor at Goddard College in the late 70s, and I remember writing on his evaluation, "You know everything I know about poetry and more. There's nothing else I can teach you." We were colleagues for many, many years at Sarah Lawrence College in New York. We crossed paths all the time on the poetry trail. I've read and will read every word he has written. His awards, fellowships, and literary prizes are too numerous to list right here, but here's just a few. The National Book Award, the National Book Critics Circle Award, the Los Angeles Times Book Award, and he was the first American poet to win England's T.S. Eliot Award. He's published 10 books of poems and 6 books of prose. He's a professor of poetry at Rutgers University, and he lives in New York City. What I've always loved about Mark's poems are their wide open, generous, and expansive heart. Like Ginger Murchison, his poems most of all move me and work first of all on my pulse. John Keats said the first test of a poem, the way you test a poem is on your pulse. Does it do something to you physically, to your body? Mark's poems have always done that to me. They can be very personal, philosophical, sometimes meditative, but never too thinky. His poems are always passionate, lucid, and urgent, written, like all good poems, as if they absolutely needed to be written. When Ginger gets up, when she's finished, when she sits down, I'll just say Mark's name again. He'll get up and read, and when he's finished, if you just hang on for literally 35 seconds so I can thank a few people. But please welcome Ginger Murchison.
Thank you, Tom, for all you've done for poets and poetry here in Atlanta and for this program, and especially for inviting me to be part of it. Something I'm very proud of. Thanks to Tom Lombardo, who's here tonight, for seeing the value in these poems and for pushing them forward to publication. I appreciate him too. And to Jackie Ralston and Travis and Kodak and Acapella Books. I'm not too close to this. Thank you all. And especially for all of you who came tonight. What an honor to be standing here in this place. The title poem of the book, the poem the title comes from, is called The Failure of Archaeology, and this book has an archaeological intention for me. The Failure of Archaeology. After the ashes have cooled, the taste of catastrophe gone from every mouth, the scholars will inch by inch dig down to a bracelet, a scrap of linen, a bone, and write the story without us. No one left to remember the seagrass smell wafting in on the breeze, the river damp, rusting wrought iron. No one left to say what really burned here, what words drifted off on salt air, forgotten now that the flames have died. I grew up in Wichita, Kansas, and the Arkansas River ran right in my backyard, and so that river runs deep in me and in this book, and this poem is called River. Late afternoons, we'd tuck up our hems under Manissa Bridge, scrape our white knees on scrub brush and drowned trees to slide down the dirt bank, past milkweed gone to seed, cattails and trash, to sit on stones at the edge of the river and giggle and smoke, waiting to wolf whistle North High's rowing team. In the shadows where the milk chocolate river unfolded ooze between our toes, we'd strip, risk long-legged leeches and mothers for the silt slick on our thighs, the air thick with the smell of honeysuckle mud. The rest of the day somewhere downstream. We didn't know why, but none of us wanted to go home to polite kitchens and mothers, patiently waiting for what happened next, the way women had always waited for hunter husbands, kept vigils, and prayed at the entrance of mines. Small Craft Advisory is a poem I wrote when I had read Huckleberry Finn to my son chapter by chapter at bedtime. Small Craft Advisory. It takes serendipitous found things to make a raft. Some nail together boards, maybe an old wooden door. You'll need a steering oar, but mostly trust the raft to find a current. Dangle your feet and drift where drifting never is a dirty word. Those holes where the water's thick are mink and muskrat homes. If you're quick, you'll see a snake slice the brackish water for a meal of frog or fish or salamander. Lie face up. Imagine you're another Galileo. What he learned, counting with his heartbeat, set him on the path to prove, the sun, the center of the universe. But he couldn't say so. Stubborn men make stubborn laws. Take some water, bread and honey, apples too, and especially a friend. It will take both of you to untie the language and discover the insignificance of speech. Now I get my daughter in here. This is called The Insult. Check out the retard doesn't sound like an insult to my daughter. She doesn't know the boy behind us in the food court loves his joke, loves even more that he's worked it for a laugh. I want to slap him, say a thing so wide I'd drive spikes of guilt inside his spine. Wish him a world of flower stems chopped off where the blooms begin. Salmon plunging belly up downstream. But she isn't in his word, and he will need her if he ever needs to know how far the sky goes or how to stay close to the ground. Lesson with flashcards. My daughter has leashed our dog to a doorknob to teach him numbers with flashcards. 3 sailboats on half the card, the number 3 on the other. 3, she says. So much love passing between them, I know I'm as close as I'll ever get to how grass feels in the rain. Bluebirds and wrens dive hell-bent at the dogwood for the last of the berries. Hunger and love have the same stinging insistence, but the berries will never last. The itinerant handyman's just rattled up through the pines his wood-paneled wagoneer full of the bowels of furnaces, the bones of appliances, hoses and ducts, every possible pipe. His pulpit to all our falterings and dead stops. I wave him on. Nothing needs fixing here. Something back to the birds. To see what his father sees, he stands on a chair high enough for the same hammer swing at the birdhouse to get every angle merit badge right. Give something back to the birds. The way he will shoot the long snake, a bully inching toward the bluebird eggs. Then that broken winged thing on his screen porch for weeks, until at last he will hold the door open, that bird's nerve up enough for a takeoff. For now, though, on this chair, in the larger shadow he will one day become, he's at work, nailing down the childhood he'll leave, not wholly gone, but following behind him like road dust. A walk on the beach. This was Christmas Day in Cancun. A beach accumulates the sea's debris, washed up bone, shell, eyeless sea life. That's understandable, but this is flesh. The indignity of bloat, blue in a purple swimsuit, heart stopped and drowned, the ungodly truth of him dragged here, the curious drawn in the way a street musician's violin is desolate enough to throw a quarter at. And this little bit of breeze, the waves, their forth and back, not even noticing his wife and daughters holding each other up in some other language, already left with the job of pushing the rest of this day into what they know is called tomorrow. I pull my son close, tell him to turn his music down, grab my daughter's hand, touch how I know what still belongs to me. And this is one of the Garrison Keillor poems, The Writer's Almanac. I Need a Big Breath. It's a one-sentence poem called Roller Coaster. It starts with the climbing in, nerved up enough for the defiance of gravity, the slow grind, rackety clack, 1-inch cog at a time, the mystery of machinery, the sane and safe weightedness of stiff starched values, wondering if there were sins we'd committed since our last confession. Then at the top, out on the edge, beyond the solid ground world parents live in, test life, theirs and our own, up where we are a hole in the sky, wholly abandoned in the eyes shut, heart stop drop, like lawlessness on falling's crisp speed, the first curve a blur, the world's suddenness, metal air, and a prayer half-mouthed, spun, flung into another plunge, a curve swerving, a tiny boat in a tempest. And isn't this how we want to live? Live higher up, hungry to leave the ground, flinging sparks, the lights brighter, the dark darker, bodies at war with mere air, but still obedient to the tracks laid down to keep us on track. Thank you very much.
I like that voice coming from somewhere out there. Please welcome. It's really a pleasure to be here. In part because there's so many of you, which is great, because it's a very warm welcome. And in part because, as Thomas mentioned, he was my teacher in grad school. And She was a great teacher because I would send him stacks of poems and he would write on one, great, write another. And the next poem he would write, good, but not bad ending, fix. And the next one he would write, nah. And this was like exactly what I needed. Somebody who just said yes, no, yes, no. A climate, a kind of fountain of support. And I came to realize over time that that support Tom was extending wasn't just to me, it was to poetry all around him. And it's been a life's work. And that's a marvelous contribution to our art and to the lives of many. I also want to say it's amazing to read in a place, I have to explain this, you know, painters have beautiful materials, tubes of color with wonderful names. They have canvas and gesso. Sculptors have marble and clay. Writers have office supplies, right? And every poet I know loves office supplies. So here I am in a school with a paper museum. It's fantastic. Do we need more? How's that? Better? Okay. A paper science center. I'm really excited. Okay, so it's a good climate to be in. So I'm going to start out with a poem. This is pretty new. It has appeared just now in this magazine, Terminus, published here. And so this feels like its debut in a way. A friend of mine says in one of his poems, marriage is a pact with the memory of another, which feels, you know, really true to me about relationships when you're with someone you join on to their childhood memory, to their lives. Marriage is also a pact with the pets of another. So, you know, for years, I have lived with big dogs. To me, a dog was not really a dog if it was not a retriever. And now I have a terrier. This is called Little George. And the title sort of flows into the first line. Little George barks at whatever is not the world as he prefers to know it. Trash sacks, hand trucks, black hats, canes and hoods, bicycles, snow shovels, someone smoking a joint beneath the overhang of the Haitian evangelicals. Anyone, how dare they, walking a dog. George barks, the tense white comma of his body arced in alarm. At home he floats in the creaturely domestic, curled in the triangle behind the sleeper's knees, wiggling on his back on the sofa, all jelly and sighs, requesting, receiving a belly rub. No worries. But outside the apartment's metal door, the unmanageable day assumes its blurred and infinite disguises. Best to bark. No matter that he's slightly larger than a toaster, he proceeds as if he rules a rectangle 2 blocks deep, bounded west and east by 7th Avenue and Union Square. Whatever's there is there by his consent, and subject to the rebuke of his refusal. Though when he asserts his will, he trembles. If only he were not solely responsible for raising outcry at any ripple of trouble on West 16th, or if, right out on the pavement, he might lay down the clanking armor of his bluster. Some evening, when he's climbed the stairs after our late walk, and rounds the landing's turn and turns his way toward a steady sleep, I wish he might be visited by a dream of the world as kind. How any looming unreadable might turn out to hold the April green of an unsullied tennis ball. Dear one, surely the future is not entirely out to get us. And if it is, barking won't help much. But no such luck, at least not yet. He takes umbrage this morning at a stone image serene in a neighbor's garden and stiffens and fixes and sounds his wild alarm. Buddha, damn you, get out of here, go away. So, not so long ago, I celebrated a birthday with a 0 on the end. And some of those I've been enthusiastic about, you know? Turning 30, feeling more like myself. The adventures of the 40s, even 50s I liked. I feel like knowing more what I wanted. Then came the next one. And, you know, I know that it's just a number. Some of the people I think are the most energetic and vital people I know are in their 60s or 70s. But I still went to bed for the day I turned 60. Then I felt a little better, and here's a description of what made me feel better. It would help for this poem to know what sky lanterns or fire lanterns are. They're a rice paper, basically a balloon. You light a wick underneath, they fill with hot air and float. In her poem, The Armadillo, Elizabeth Bishop calls them frail, illegal fire balloons. 60. Dangerous invitations packed flat. 6 sky lanterns for my birthday. Rice paper sack glued to the seams, a thin bamboo ring at bottom for a mouth, a wire armature holding a deck of cards stacked of paper soaked in wax. Frail, illegal, we know. But this birthday ends in 0, a turn I'm not so inclined to celebrate. And who could resist a lantern lifted by its own flame, sailing out over an August night's black bay? At Land's End, no other citizen in sight, only the deep, unfractioned evening, a sheen of overcast bent down toward a horizon it erased. And here, in our flashlit circle, a blonde grass shoulder edge of dune, a bit of pavement, and just in case, a fire extinguisher. We huddle around the first, one for each decade past, one for the one to come. Unfold the paper shells, steady the base, hold the opening level, touch a lighter to the wick, and feel, in our 4 hands, the thing swell, tugging upward, a bucking saffron lung we couldn't hold back a moment longer. Who knew, till that first one rose, how gorgeous this token would be, lit from within. And there were still 5 more to come, restless in our hands. My life wanted to be born another time between us, to tear upward and become animal, and make it in air the shape it would make. This and no other. Write the night enormous. Is that what souls are for? Drunk on my birthday wine, and maybe having smoked a little too, you'd miscounted, and hadn't brought one more for the years ahead. Thank you, love, for that. You'd meant to, but some guiding instinct, wisdom, stayed your hand and left the last lantern folded and waiting on a shelf, the better part of your gift. So, like, I believe all of us, I've been horrified by the evidence of racially motivated brutality on the part of law enforcement officials in our country. It's become very visible to us. Perhaps this has always been the case, but this has changed the world. Many, many people now have access to an immediate means of documentation of what's around them. I really wanted to speak about what we're seeing, and found it just impossible to write about until I began to think about the death of Tamir Rice. Tamir Rice was 12 years old. He was killed by the police in Cleveland, Ohio in November of 2014. He was playing with a toy gun and was shot as a result. When you think about the death of a child, it calls to mind how much time has gone into preparing for that life, how many people have contributed to it, and how much future has vanished with that death as well. In 2 seconds. The boy's face climbed back down the 12-year tunnel of its becoming, a charcoal sunflower swallowing itself. Who has eyes to see or ears to hear? If you could see what happens fastest, unmaking the human irreplaceable, a star falling into complete gravitational darkness from all points of itself, all this, the held, loved body, into which entered milk and music, honeying the cells of him, who sang to him, stroked the nape of the scalp, kissed the flesh knot, after the cord completed its work of fueling into him the long history of those whose suffering was made more bearable by the as yet unknown of him, playing alone in some unthinkable future city, a Cleveland, whatever that might be. 2 seconds to elapse. The arc of joy in the conception bed, the labor of hands repeated until the hands no longer required attention, so that as the woman folded, her hopes for him sank into the fabric of his shirts and underpants. Down they go, swirling down into the maw of a greater dark. Treasure book, treasure box, comic books, pocket knife, bell from a lost cat's collar. Why even begin to enumerate them when behind every tributary poured into him comes rushing backward all he hasn't been yet? Everything that boy could have thought or made, sung or theorized, built on the quavering but continuous structure that had preceded him, sank into an absence in the shape of a boy playing with a plastic gun in a city park in Ohio in the middle of the afternoon. When I say 2 seconds, I don't mean the time it took him to die. I mean the lapse between the instant the cruiser lurched to a halt on the grass, between that moment and the one in which the officer fired his weapon. The 2 seconds taken to assess the situation. And though I believe it is part of the work of poetry to try on at least the moment and skin of another, for this hour I respectfully decline. I refuse it. May that officer be visited every night of his life by an enormity collapsing in front of him into an incomprehensible bloom, and the voice that howls out of it. If this is no poem, then, but that voice, erased boy, beloved of time, who did nothing to no one and became nothing because of it, I know that voice is one of the things we call poetry. It isn't to his killer he's speaking. Thank you. So, I want to read a poem. You know, in a way that poem speaks to the worst we can do together, right? Soon I will be shedding my clothes up here. This is impossible. That poem, I think, speaks to the worst we can do together, the way we can judge one another, mistreat one another. I want to read a poem which speaks to some of the best we could do together. And this one, I wanted to dedicate to Jeff and Dana, for whom I think it has a special meaning. It's a poem that began some years ago. I was living in a little town on the Massachusetts coast, and 2,500 people year-round, small community. And when we heard that our town choral society was going to perform Handel's Messiah, it was a little bit doubtful. I went to the performance. It was an afternoon when there was this beautiful sunset over the church. And I looked at the sunset and I thought, that is a sure thing if I stay out here. And if I go in, there's one word in this poem you may not know. It's melisma. Melisma is when you're singing and you hold a syllable across many notes. So, Gloria, that's a melisma. Okay? That is the last singing that will take place. Messiah, Christmas portions. And I feel very stylish doing this. I didn't have the book with me, but you can find this poem on the web. Messiah, Christmas portions. A little heat caught in gleaming rags, in shrouds of veil, torn and sunshot swaddlings. Over the Methodist roof, 2 clouds propose a Zion of their own, blazing colors of tarnish on copper, against the steely close of a coastal afternoon, December, while under the steeple, the choral society prepares to perform Messiah, pouring in their best blacks and whites onto the rake stage. Not steep, really, but from here, the first pew, there a looming cloud bank of familiar angels, that neighbor who fights operatically with her girlfriend, for one, and the friendly bearded clerk from the post office, tenor trapped in the body of a baritone, altos from the A&P, soprano from the t-shirt shop. Today, they're all poised, costume and purpose conveying the right note of distance and formality. Silence in the hall, anticipatory, as if we're all about to open a gift we're not sure we'll like. How could they compete with sunset's burnished oratorio? Thoughts which vanish when the violins begin. Who'd have thought they'd be so good? Every valley, proclaims the solo tenor, a sleek blonde I've seen somewhere before. The liquor store shall be exalted, and in his handsome mouth the word is lifted and opened into more syllables than we could count. Central ah dilated in a Baroque melisma, liquefied. The pour of voice seems to make the unplaned landscape. The text predicts the Lord will heighten and tame. This music demonstrates what it claims. Glory shall be revealed. If art's acceptable evidence, mustn't what lies behind the world be at least as beautiful as the human voice? The tenors lack confidence, and the soloists, half of them anyway, don't have the strength to found the mighty kingdoms these passages propose. But the chorus, all together, equals my burning clouds, and seems itself to burn, commingled powers deeded to a larger, centering claim. These aren't anyone we know. Familiarity, acquiring dissolves familiarity in an outpouring rush which will not rest, will not for a moment be still. Aren't we enlarged by the scale of what we're able to desire? Everything, the choir insists, might flame. Inside these wrappings burns another, brighter life, quickened now by song. Hear how it cascades in overlapping, lapidary waves of praise. Still time to change. So I'm going to read two more poems. This one has to do with what happens to us when our habits are broken. Habit gets a bad rep. You know, we think if you do the same thing all the time, you're locked into a routine. Your senses aren't open. You're not looking around you. But you know, if you know what you like to eat for breakfast, you don't have to think about it every day, right? You can think about something else. Sometimes habit allows you to have more of an interior life. One of my habits was taken away from me, and that initiated this poem, which, for reasons you'll see in a minute, is called This Your Home Now. For years, I went to the Peruvian barbers on 18th Street. Comforting, welcome. The full coat rack, 3 chairs held by 3 barbers, eldest by the window, the middle one a slight fellow who spoke an oddly feminine Spanish. The youngest last, red-haired, self-consciously masculine. And in each of the mirrors, their children's photos, mildly smutty cartoons, postcards from Machu Picchu. I was happy in any chair, though I liked best the touch of the eldest, who'd rest his hand against my neck in a thoughtless, confident way. 10 years, maybe. One day, the powdery blue steel shutters pulled down over the window and door, not to be raised again. They'd lost their lease. I didn't know how at a loss I'd feel. This haze around what I like to think the sculptural presence of my skull requires neither art nor science. But 2 haircuts on 7th, 1 in Dublin, nothing right. Then, I hear my friend Marie laughing over my shoulder saying, in your poems there's always a then, and I think, is it a poem without a then? Dull early winter, back on 18th, up spiraling red in a cylinder of glass, and just below the line of sidewalk, a new sign, Willie's Barbershop. Dark hallway, glass door, and there's presumably Willie. When I tell him I used to go down the street, he says in an inscrutable accent, this your home now. Puts me in a chair, asks me what I want, and soon he's clipping and singing with the radio's Latin dance tune. That's when I notice Willie's walls, though he's been here all the week, spangled with images hung in barbershops since the beginning of time. Lounge singers, near celebrities, random boxers, Italian boys, Puerto Rican, caught in the hour of their beauty, though they'd scowl at the word. Frames are dusty, at slight angles. Here, it's clear, forever. Are barbershops like aspens, each sprung from a common root 10,000 years old? Sons of one father, flashing fighters and starlets to shield the tenderness of their hearts? Our guardian Willie defies time. His chair our ferry boat. And we go down in the trance of touch and the skull buzz drone, singing cranial nerves in the direction of peace. And so I understand that in the back of this nothing building on 18th Street, I found that door ajar before, in daylight, when it shouldn't be. Some forgotten bulb left burning in a shaft of my uncharted nights. The men I have outlived await their turns, the fevered and wasted, whose mothers and lovers scattered their ashes and gave away their clothes. 20 years, and their names tumble into a numb well, though in truth I have not forgotten one of you, may I never forget one of you, these layers of men arrayed in their no longer breathing ranks. Willie, I have not lived well in my grief for them. I have lugged this weight from place to place as though it were mine to account for, and today I sit in your good chair in the 6th decade of my life. And if your back door is a threshold of the kingdom of the lost, yours is a steady hand on my shoulder. Go down into the still waters of this chair and come up refreshed, ready to face the avenue. Maybe I do believe we will not be left comfortless. after everything comes tumbling down, or you tear it down and stumble in the Shadow Valley trenches of the moon, there's still a decent chance at a barbershop, salsa on the radio, the instruments of renewal wielded effortlessly, and who'd have thought, for you, Willie, if he is Willie, fusses much longer over my head than my head merits, which allows me to be grateful without qualification. Could I be a little satisfied? There's a man who loves me, our dogs, 15, 20 more good years if I'm a bit careful. There's what I haven't written. It's sunny out, though cold. After I tip Willie, I'm going down to Jane Street, to a coffee shop I like, and then I'm going to write this poem. Then, Willie and I've got to be friends. And the other day I went to get a haircut and I opened my wallet, there was nothing in it, and Willie says, "Oh, you need money?" and another day he's all pink. I said, "Willie, you're not in the sun." He says, "I have little drink." So this last poem, I think, speaks for itself. It would be helpful for you to visualize hydrangeas, those summer garden flowers, usually pink or blue, that actually get more beautiful as they fade, change. This is called Spent. Late August morning, I go out to cut spent and faded hydrangeas, washed greens, russets, troubled little auras of sky, as if these were the very silks of Versailles, modeled by rain and ruin, then half restored, after all this time. When I come back with my handful, I realize I've accidentally locked the door and can't get back into the house. The dining room window's easiest. Crawl through beauty bush and spirea, push aside some errant maples, take down the wood frame screen, hoist myself up. But how exactly to clamber across the sill and radiator down to the tile? I push myself up so that my waist rests against the sill and lean forward, place my hands on the floor and begin to slide down into the room, which makes me think this was what it was like to be born. Awkward, too big for the passageway. Negotiate, submit. When I give myself to gravity, there I am, inside, no harm, the dazzling, splotchy flower heads scattered around me on the floor. Will leaving the world be the same? Uncertainty as to how to proceed, some discomfort, and suddenly you're where? I am so involved with this idea, I forget to unlock the door. So when I go out to fetch the mail, I'm locked out again. Am I at home in this house? Would I prefer to be out here, where I could be almost anyone? This time it's simpler. The window frame, the radiator, my descent, born twice in one day. In their silver jug, these bruised, blessed flowers, how hard I had to work to bring them into this room. When I say spent, I don't mean they have no further coin. If there are lives to come, I think they might be a little easier than this one. Thank you.
That was incredible. How many of you are first-year students here? Awful lot of you. How many of you is the first poetry reading you've ever been to? A lot of you. Pretty cool, right? I mean, did you expect something like this? Or do you expect some old guy up here mumbling into the microphone? Or maybe somebody snapping their fingers with bongos or something like that? That's not the way it is. There's all kinds of poetry. There's room for all kinds of poetry, but we're going to try to bring poets here who speak clearly and originally and with some kind of brio and energy. I want to thank Terry Williams, who's the curator here at the museum, for providing this wonderful venue, and again Travis and Katie and Kodak and Teresa Davis and Ken Kinespel, our dean, Jackie Royster, who's been such a great supporter of poetry at Tech. Another reading later in November. Come again. Thank you all very much.